This is 100 Years of Cocks. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. I'm telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machel Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. These siblings are my family. Sibling number 2, Edmund, is my great-grandfather. In this episode, we have letters from Edmund, Avice and Enid, written in November 1907. The siblings are planning a special Christmas edition of the budget, which Bernard is busy editing, and both Dr. Cox and Mrs. Cox contribute articles as well. The siblings are busy writing items for it, including limericks, which were wildly popular in the early 1900s. Limerick writing will make Cuthbert cross. The 1907 Christmas budget will be coming up soon in this podcast. Edmund has a headache, and his letter is late again, although he has made a better effort this time. Well done, Edmund. Send your sixpenny fine home to Sydenham again. Avice has been to see a D'Oyly Carte production of the Yeoman of the Guard, and she's playing hockey, and she's wearing a short hockey skirt. But there is no cause for alarm. Avice is still quite respectable. The hem of a short hockey skirt was about 10 centimetres above the ankle in the early 1900s. Enid starts off a family discussion regarding the dramatic and high-profile Druce-Portland case, which was in all the newspapers, concerning mistaken identity, the Duke of Portland, a lot of money, and whether or not a coffin should be exhumed and opened. Gripping stuff. The British public was clearly interested, and the siblings go on to discuss it at great length in later letters. Edmund's letter. Woolly Moor, Tuesday, November the 12th, 1907. Dear Family B, my day of grace ends either today or tomorrow, though I believe the latter, and so I must at any rate make a start today, although I know I shall not be able to send it off before tomorrow. I must acknowledge that I have been leniently treated for past mishaps. 14th of November. I only just managed to get this letter started on the 12th, and was then interrupted, and yesterday, the 13th, I had such a bad headache in the morning that I was really not up to tackling it, and I had to go to Clay Cross for a funeral in the afternoon. I am now a day behind my time, so must perforce fall in with Bernard's suggestion of a sixpenny fine, and will forward it to Mother with my old letter. The cause of my headache yesterday was a most tremendous gale of wind during the previous night. I have never experienced it so strong in England before. It actually shook this strongly built stone house, and it also managed to overturn a small haystack, etc. I think some of you know that I'm very sorry to say that the Ellises are leaving the farm next March, so that if I stay on in Clay Cross parish, I shall have to look out for fresh rooms, which seems very impossible to me. Of course, there is a chance I may be settled in a living of my own before then. I only hope it may be so. I am sorry to say that I have at present only received a very few quotations to fit the various members of the family, as I asked for in my last letter. By request, I have decided to keep this competition open until the budget comes round to me again. I once again appeal to you all to send something for someone at any rate, and that you will all further include any quotation suitable to the budget as a whole, as well as all members of the family. I think Bernard's idea of a Christmas number of the Bee is a splendid one, and hope that everyone will try to contribute something. But I also hope that the writing may be extra legible, or that our editor will get the majority typewritten. Avice, I really think your letter deserves the first prize. It is certainly A1. Your usual illustration was most amusing, and on the whole, together with the description, fairly truthful. I quite forgive you for having drawn down a sixpenny fine upon my head. Your sketches of the budget members' reading are very delightful. I waited till I could give 2 hours to the accomplishment, and then settled myself in an easy chair by the fire with a pipe. It actually took me an hour to digest Neville's splendid long letter. Enid, I think your latest Hazel story caps the lot. I hope you are keeping a faithful record of them. Think how interesting they will be to her in years to come. I should like to have confiscated your enclosed photos. As you have severely dropped on Avice and her insistence that her student's budget began dear 1907s, I won't add my censure, as I otherwise should have done. Bernard, a very noble contribution this time. Success to the Xmas budget. Perhaps Arthur would write you one of his old original plays, such as The Queen of Hearts, a copy of which I am pleased to say I still possess. What on earth does Eliza has a little one, etc. mean? I suggest you reprint it, with explanation, in the Xmas B. Explanation sent to Edmund privately, Bernard adds. I expect Aldwyn included me among the 5 members of the budget who had had military training of a sort, referring to my long experience with the Church Lads Brigade. I expect I know more of the present drill now than some of you. Bernard, I can't decipher your scratched out line, though I have tried hard. It looks rather like hide all the, or like all the. Are you going to enlighten us? I warrant all the others have tried, though they may not have acknowledged it in their letters. Your account of the airship was most interesting, and I greatly appreciate you describing it for our benefit. There certainly is far too much hidden intellect in Browning's poems to allow them to appeal to me, except in the case of a few exceptions, as Wilf mentions. I was very pleased to see Wilfred's letter, but I hope he will be more fortunate in his note paper next time. I abominate having to write on this thin foreign stuff. Cuthbert, I know I can hardly afford to throw stones, but I certainly must say that I found a good deal of difficulty in reading a good deal of your contribution this time. Your story of the small boy shaking the head's hand takes some swallowing. Your camp photos are very interesting. Arthur, I am very sorry that Dorothy has withdrawn from the budget. We shall all miss her welcome little contributions. I wish I was capable of furnishing the desired illustration, but I am afraid I cannot manage it. I have experimented on an extra piece of paper, but dare not show my efforts. I was very tempted to collar 1 or 2 of your photos, especially the one of Neville playing cards. Please send me one. Your bath in the sea at Rame Head must indeed have been exciting. Surely Avice might illustrate it for us. I am sorry I have no ideal night garb to recommend, but, like you, I abominate pyjamas. I find a large, long nightshirt the best, flannelette in winter, and something cooler in the summer. What on earth do you mean by, does anyone know who R is? Please explain. Vera, I think Avice's description of her hockey is, to say the least, quite quaint. Once again, I think Avice has another splendid subject for illustration. A.C. McLaren, the cricketer, who you will all be familiar with from the newspapers, gave me a lift to Stretton Station the other day, and we travelled together to Derby. I found him most interesting, and very ready to talk on all subjects, including cricket, Ranji, Indian famine experiences, other anecdotes, and motor cars. He lives at Ashover, close to here. I am glad to say that I've shaken off my asthma, I think, though I still catch cold very easily. I have started golf again. Adieu for the present. Having rather a cold, I feel most uninteresting. Your affectionate brother, Edmund. Notes on Edmund's letter. Avice draws an illustration of Edmund playing golf in the half page at the end of Edmund's letter. He's been playing golf, but he's been too busy to write his budget letter. I will put Avice's drawing on Twitter, although it might have been Bernard's drawing. I'm not sure. Edmund is still living at Farmer Ellis's farmhouse in Claycross, although it won't be long before he moves to Hallam Fields, to a church of his own. A photo of Edmund's house was included in the budget, and the house is still there today, although now it is no longer a farmhouse, but very comfortable self-catering accommodation. I will put both photos on Twitter. Poor Edmund has a headache. Due to the wild weather in Derbyshire, I find Edmund a bit flaky sometimes. He always has an excuse, although he does have the most beautiful handwriting. Have a look on Twitter. I will include the last page of Edmund's letter with the golfing drawing. I abominate pyjamas, says Edmund. What a fabulous phrase. A flannelette nightshirt in the winter and something cooler in the summer. Edmund would be absolutely horrified at his great-granddaughter telling people about his nightshirts. But it is this level of detail which makes these letters so interesting, I think. And his siblings continue the nightshirt pyjamas discussion in upcoming letters. Avice's letter. Garfield House School, 20th of November, 1907. Dear family, I am so delighted with the idea of having an Xmas budget. It will be fun. I hope everyone will contribute something, but it is the part of the editor to urge, but I don't suppose there will be much need for encouragement. It is rather quaint, I see. I began my last budget with a remark that I had a supposed head cold, and now it is just the same again, begun today. I see Vera has told you about her and Burr's visit at half-term. It was jolly. What a good account you have given of the football match, Vera. I did enjoy the theatre with them, and Vera, fascinating is just the word I should use to describe the effect of the play. I asked a few people here whether they had been to see the Bells, and they said, oh no, they didn't care for such tragic things. I rather think they thought it would be melodramatic, and I dare say it all depends on the acting of the chief character, but Irving certainly saved it from that. But the realism of it was really rather terrible at times. It is the story of a man who had committed a murder, and he was haunted by the idea that he would betray it. He had lain in wait for a man who was to pass a certain road in a sleigh in winter time. Afterwards he is always hearing the sound of the bells on the sleigh. He seems to have become half mad with fear and the horror of it. The last act, in which he dreams a judge and a court are examining him, and find out his story by the means of a mesmerist, is awful for anyone to act. The dream is acted out, but I think perhaps the play does not bear describing. But if any of you by any chance didn't know the story, I thought our remarks would mean nothing to you. I've also been to see the Yeoman of the Guard this term with Arthur and Mr. Moore, done by the Doyley Cart Company. I did enjoy it. The songs are just delightful. I suppose you all know by now that I have joined a mixed hockey club this term. All the clubs round here seem to be mixed, and really it is a better game than I thought it would be. At first I was rather alarmed, as a big chap who appeared bigger than Cuthbert was my opposing forward. There are practice games twice a week. At present there have been no matches, as the club has only just started. I have got a most beautiful long blue blanket coat to go in. Arthur says I look a funny little object, but I believe that remark refers to me without the coat, in my short hockey skirt. It is very nice to play hockey again. Bernard, I am sorry to say both Arthur and I tried to read your interesting remark with a black smear over it, but did not succeed. I think it says, like all. Arthur suggests, like all the others. Neville, what reams you have written, and such easy handwriting to read. It was very nice of you to give the budget readers such a splendid long account of all your doings in Europe. I should have liked to see Venice. Arthur, it was rather funny when Vera was here. She asked me if I knew what shooting for the pot meant, and I told her. But when Burr asked me if I knew what pot hunting was, I immediately asked Vera, as I didn't know. Wilfrid, you have written a splendid, long, rambling budget letter. Your story of the coyote and Neville is lovely. I should think Aldwyn's yell might often be mistaken for an animal. How very absurd of me putting dear 1907s instead of dear 1903s as our form of address in my students' budget. Cuthbert, I should like to hear your Hiawatha. Do you give performances at the end of term? Edmund, I do hope people will send you quotations. I cannot do it myself, but I should love reading the results. I shall try to send some illustrations of some little figures for the Xmas budget. I have drawn Edmund and Arthur. 1. Edmund, comfortable for the night, wearing his nightshirt. 2. Arthur, in his usual discomfort, hoping he has found his ideal at last. Edmund, Burr and Vera are equal in the competition of guessing figures again. They were the best guessers of the last lot. But Ed would have put Wilfrid for Cuthbert if he had known he was a member of the budget. So I think I count Burr and Vera equal best. In figure 1, I didn't think of the attitude at the table, so long as I could make someone looking harassed and worried, or perhaps I should say deeply buried in it, but bothered by lack of time. Edmund has several times mentioned the time it takes to look through the letters, as if he found it rather a hard but nice job. Hence this figure 1 is meant for Edmund, not Arthur. Figure 2, all of you guessed that this was meant to be Aldwyn. Figure 3, most of you think, correctly, this is Cuthbert with feet on the table. I feel sure Cuthbert would throw himself into some comfortable lounging position in which to read the budget. Figure 4 was meant for Wilfrid. I wanted to represent all the other members if I could. Wilfrid always says his idea of comfort was a good fire, a good book, a good cigarette, so I thought he would read the budget roasting over a fire, smoking cigarette after cigarette until the place is full of smoke. Didn't you see the smoke? I'm afraid the cigarette is on the floor, because the artist forgot to put it in his mouth at the beginning, and then was afraid there was not room for it. Fancy asking such a question. I should say Wilfrid got so enthralled in reading the budget that he actually forgot his cigarette for the moment, and it fell from his mouth. It had to be in the picture somewhere, which is why it is on the floor. Must stop, as it is after 11:30. Best wishes for Xmas, but I hope I shall see the budget again before then. Edmund, it is very kind of you to forgive me for my space left for suggestions of punishments for offenders. Much love to all the family, Avice. P.S. I have put in another photo of Vera, taken by Arthur. It must not be taken out. Notes on Avice's letter. Several of the siblings go to the theatre a lot, but then, of course, there were no movies and no TV. Silent films were still a novelty up until about 1900, but they were clearly not common in England by 1907, or Bernard would definitely have gone to see them, and he would have written about them in the budget. He is always talking about which play he has seen recently. Avice writes about herself, Vera, and Bernard going to see the play, The Bells, presumably at a theatre in Plymouth. The Bells was originally a French play, which was translated into English by Leopold David Lewis. It was first performed in 1871 and was not a success at first. The audience apparently sat in stunned silence as it finished. But The Bells went on to become a hugely popular play, and Charles Irving, the lead actor, became a star. He was the first actor ever to receive a knighthood. It is his son, H.B. Irving, who the siblings have seen in 1907 in the title role of The Bells. What has interested me is a quote from the play, "The bells, the bells." I always thought that quote related to the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the sound of church bells, but it appears to refer to Charles Irving acting in The Bells. Irving died in 1905, yet his agonised cry of "The bells, the bells" is still remembered by many more than 100 years later. The play is a dramatic and psychological study of fear, panic, and regret. The main character has killed a man who was travelling by sleigh along a snowy road, and the bells refer to the sleigh bells on the horses, not the church bells of Notre Dame in Paris. I've been reading up about this, and there is also possibly a connection to a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, also called The Bells. He wrote a beautiful poem full of alliteration, personification, and repetition, although his poem is probably about church bells. The play was made into a film 5 times between 1911 and 1931. In one version, Gustav Holst, the composer of The Planets, wrote the music, but this version of the film and the music have since been lost. The play, The Bells, and the poem, also called The Bells, and the book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, were all written in the 1800s, and then there were 5 films. And then Game of Thrones also called one episode The Bells. It is quite likely that one of them influenced another, but who knows? I've not been able to pin it down exactly. The other interesting thing is that Avice talks about the main character being mesmerised, which was similar but different to hypnotism and was quite popular then. Anyway, the story is scary. The sound effects of a raging storm, a clock striking 10, breaking crockery, a church bell, and the sleigh bells all add to the dramatic tension. The main character dies at the end, and Vera and Avice are glad that they are sharing a room at Garfield House, as both are uneasy about the plot and the play. Avice also talks about going to the theatre to see Yeoman of the Guard by Gilbert and Sullivan, and how much she likes the music. I think Arthur, Mr. Moore, and Avice probably watched it in Plymouth, where the D'Oyly Carte Company was probably touring, but it could also have been at the Savoy Theatre in London, where the D'Oyly Carte Company was based at the time. Gilbert and Sullivan operas at the Savoy were enormously popular. Bernard, Cuthbert and Vera all talk about going to watch a Gilbert and Sullivan show at the Savoy, which was built in the 1880s and is still there, on the Strand in London, next door to Simpson's in the Strand, a famous old restaurant, which is also mentioned in budget letters. The siblings have all said they like Avice's drawings, and they encourage her to draw more. In this letter she draws a sketch of Edmund in his nightshirt, and Arthur, who looks like he may be wearing short pyjamas, which confuses me, as in the next budget Bernard writes a list of those who favour nightshirts and those who prefer the more modern pyjamas, and Arthur is definitely in the nightshirt column. Avice also gives the answers for her previous sketches, where she drew 4 members of the budget reading it, asking her siblings to guess who she has in mind, including her sketch of Wilfrid, reading the budget whilst smoking, only she forgot to put the cigarette in Wilfrid's mouth, and then there wasn't room for it, so she drew the cigarette on the floor and suggests that Wilfrid must have dropped it. I will put all of these drawings on Twitter. Enid's letter, 187 Lodge Lane, Liverpool, 25th of November 1907. Dear family, this budget has come round in very grand time, a great improvement on its predecessors. An Xmas budget is a welcome thought. Shall I be allowed to read it if I don't send a contribution? At present, the spirit does not move me. Liverpool has been very wet and gloomy lately. We certainly miss our Preston district very much, which abounded with health resorts, e.g. Blackpool, Kirby Lonsdale, Grange, Furness, Coniston, etc. I felt as if a change would do me good, so we went off for a week in Llandudno. It was quite new to both of us, and we liked the place much better than we expected. Of course, it must be very crowded in summer, but even then the trippers must be of a fairly high class. At any rate, they are not provided with amusements or music halls, etc., of the type that abound in Blackpool. The charm of Llandudno is its situation. It is built on an isthmus, about 3/4 of a mile across, having thus two entirely different shores. The views of the Welsh mountains from the Conway shore are delightful. The Great Orme forms the peninsula. There is now a splendid carriage drive round the peninsula, 6 miles long. Cyril had some good walks round Capel Curig and Betsy Coed. What do you all think of this Druce-Portland case, which is now appearing in the papers? It seems to me that the American Caldwell and Miss Robinson are really first-class liars. But why is not that coffin opened? It would seem such a short way to settle all the difficulties. I am sorry that I cannot recall any Hazel story at the moment, except that yesterday at dinner, when we were eating our Sunday roast beef, she inquired if it was part of a cow, and then went on to say, "I prefer the soft place in a calf," which we finally discovered meant calf's liver. Owen sent a special petition that no one should give him Diabolo for a Christmas present, as he thought it was a beastly game. However, the request came too late, as his Aunt Edie has already sent it to me as his Christmas present. By the way, at Llandudno they call it Diabello and Satan at play. Burr, your account of the airship was most interesting. As to Browning, you seem from your letter to regard tons of twaddle and prose as synonymous terms. I will agree that his style is somewhat difficult, eccentric, and obscure. If you like to call it prose, I will let that pass. But I do demur to your suggestion that much of it is twaddle. Browning never sacrificed sense to sword. I quote, "He values thought more than expression, matter more than form, and judging him from a strictly poetic point of view, he has lost his balance in this direction, as so many have lost it in the opposite one. He has never ignored beauty, but he has neglected it in the desire for significance. He is never meant to be rugged, but he has become so in the exercise of strength. He has never intended to be obscure, but he has become so from the condensation of style, which was the excess of significance and of strength." Bernard, on looking at your letter again, I see that you add, "There is too much intellect in Browning and not enough beauty." I must apologise. I had somehow quite overlooked this, and my remarks are not much to the point. I wonder why Wilfred included Holy Cross Day in his list. That, I grant, is grotesque and fantastic to a degree. Have you read Prospice and One Word More? Cuthbert, I do pity you over your teeth, and I do hope you are well again now, and your Aldershot camp photos are really very good. Arthur, I certainly had not taken in that Dorothy was withdrawing from the budget. I am very sorry indeed, and I hope it is only for a time. I suppose you will at least allow her to read it. I was very much interested in your photographs, and I should much like copies of Neville playing cards, and the one of Avice and Vera. I don't think you should take your pupils to such dangerous spots for sea photography. One of these days, if you are not careful, you will be furnishing material for the Daily Mail readers. What on earth does Anglis Redenda refer to? You will also be interested to hear that Cyril quite agrees with you and Edmund in the discussion now going on about nightshirts versus pyjamas. Vera, I am amazed at your knowledge of rugby football. Owen would much appreciate you. Last week, unasked, he sent me a small book on the laws of rugby football so that I might understand his letters better. I return Owen's and Hazel's photos for the family photograph book. I am very glad for your sake, as well as father's, that the reliquary is to have at least a year's probation. Edmund, I am so sorry you will have to leave your comfortable quarters, but hope that by the time the budget again reaches you, you may have heard of something to your advantage. I have sent you a few poetic quotations, but I found them very difficult. I do hope other budget members will also do their duty. Neville, I have thoroughly enjoyed your long budget letter. It was very good of you to give such a detailed account. It must have taken ages to write. It took me 25 minutes to read, and it took Edmund an hour. Of course, I know some of the places you describe, so I was specially interested. But I am so sorry that you had such bad weather, and also that you could not see Milan Cathedral in the daytime. I should certainly like to see Pompeii. It sounds most interesting. Wilfrid, your letter was most amusing and interesting. Cyril would quite approve of your suggestion that future letters should be written with a margin, for he has been remarking that it would be well to have tags attached to each letter on which you could inscribe "interesting bit here," etc., to save readers the trouble of wading through the mass of manuscript. Needless to say, this opinion is not mine. I have read a good many novels this time, but like Vera, I have forgotten to keep a list. The Halo by Baroness von Hutton is unpleasant and repellent. It is thoroughly unwholesome. The heroine falls in love with the father of her fiancé, and some of the minor characters are even more objectionable. This book ought certainly to be put on the blacklist. But I hesitate to put the author on the blacklist, as I so much liked another of her books, My Lady of the Beaches. Truly, it appears that a fountain can yield both salt water and fresh, in spite of the opinion of St. James. Queen Victoria's Letters, Volume 1. I have got this from the Times Book Club, and am very much interested in it, though I can't get Cyril to read it. It is astonishing to notice the very gushing way in which the Queen and her uncle Leopold wrote to each other. Nowadays it would be quite impossible. For instance, in writing of her husband to her relations, she constantly calls him her dearest angel. Happy Christmas to you all. Yours affectionately, Enid. Notes on Enid's letter. Enid has been ill, although from exactly what, no one says. But she's clearly gone to Llandudno in northern Wales to recuperate and take the sea air. She talks about the 6-mile carriage drive around the peninsula of Great Orme, which was opened in the 1870s, and it's a narrow road around the headland with glorious views. I've just been exploring it using Street View. You can drop the little yellow man down and you can walk all the way round. I don't know about you, but I often forget the original purpose that some of these roads were built for. Narrow, winding, completely unsuitable for today's large cars. But I'm sure it was a lovely carriage ride for invalids who were getting better, wrapped up in rugs and furs, in open carriages pulled by horses, or early motor cars, taking the sea air. What a contrast to today. Enid included 14 book reviews in her letter. This podcast would go on all day if I included all of them, so I just picked a few that appealed to me. And finally, the Druce-Portland case, which the siblings will discuss at great length in the next few budgets. Thomas Druce died in 1864, and he was buried in Highgate Cemetery. The 5th Duke of Portland, an eccentric recluse, died in 1879 and was buried at Kensal Green Cemetery. Decades later, there were family members arguing, illegitimate children, various wives and servants and disputes. There was a claim that Thomas Druce was actually the Duke of Portland in disguise, and there are photographs where he's possibly wearing a false beard. Robert Coldwell and Miss Robertson were two of the witnesses in the court case in 1907. There was discussion about handwriting, comparison of photographs, stories of a fake burial, contradictory information and inconsistencies. Polite society loved it. The newspapers were full of the court case, and people were enthralled by this collective airing of dirty linen in public. As Enid said, why on earth don't they just open the coffin? They did in December 1907. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cocks, Bernard writes about the great question of nightshirt versus pyjamas, which is now nightly before me. Bernard also writes about Reverend Dr. Cox shouting at carol singers and chasing them out of the garden. Cuthbert has had 17 teeth pulled out in total, at the startling age of just 27 years old, and is waiting for his permanent dentures to be ready. Bernard and Cuthbert give their opinions on the Druce-Portland case. Arthur has students in quarantine due to scarlet fever, and is also eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Christmas budget. And he's working in his darkroom on photographs wearing an old nightshirt. Vera has to finish her letter abruptly due to the dreadful news that something is missing from the Christmas budget, and Bernard, the editor, needs her help to go and look for it. 100 Years of Cocks. The Machel Cox budget letters and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Machel Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share all sorts of things. If you have any questions, please write to me. I'd love to hear from you. machelcoxletters@gmail.com. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cocks. Thank you for listening.